August 1920. Warsaw. The streets are silent, not with peace, but with the terrible quiet that comes before the end. Mothers clutch their children. Old men who survived the partitions stare eastward, knowing what approaches. In the distance, beyond the Vistula River, dust rises on the horizon like a gathering storm. The red tide is coming. 700,000 Soviet soldiers, the largest revolutionary army ever assembled. And they're marching not just to conquer Poland, they're marching to set Europe ablaze. This is Marcus from Forgotten Frontlines, and today we're uncovering one of history's most pivotal battles, a clash so decisive it altered the course of the 20th century. Yet most people have never heard of it. This is the story of the miracle at the Vistula, the battle that saved Europe. To understand what's at stake in August 1920, you need to understand what Poland represents. For 123 years, Poland didn't exist. Carved up by Russia, Prussia, and Austria in the late 18th century, an entire nation was erased from the map. Its people scattered, its language suppressed, its dreams suffocated under foreign rule. But here's what the empires didn't count on. You can occupy a country, but you can't kill an idea. When World War I ended in November 1918, Poland rose from the ashes. Independence was proclaimed in Warsaw on the same day Germany surrendered. After more than a century, Poland was reborn. But this resurrection came with a terrible price. No one knew where Poland's borders should be. Enter two men with two very different visions. Józef Piłsudski, Poland's chief of state and the architect of its new army. A man who dreamed not just of Polish independence, but of a federation of free nations stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. A bulwark against both German and Russian imperialism. He called it Między Mors, between the seas. And Vladimir Lenin, who looked at Poland and saw something else entirely. Not a nation, but a bridge. The road to world conflagration, he said, leads over Poland's corpse. Lenin's logic was brutal and simple. To spread communism to Germany, to France, to all of Western Europe, the Red Army had to cross Polish soil. Poland wasn't just an obstacle, it was the obstacle. By early 1920, these two visions were on a collision course that would determine the fate of a continent. Let me paint you a picture of this strategic situation. After crushing the White Russian armies in the Civil War, the Soviets turned their full attention westward. By January 1920, they were concentrating 700,000 troops near the Polish border. Think about that number. 700,000 soldiers, fresh from victory, ideologically driven, commanded by brilliant young officers like Mikhail Tukhachevsky. Tukhachevsky, just 27 years old, a military prodigy who would revolutionize Soviet doctrine. And in July 1920, he stood at the height of his powers. On July 4th, he launched his offensive. The numbers were overwhelming. At crucial points, the Soviets outnumbered Polish forces 4-1. Poland's 200-mile front was held by just 120,000 exhausted troops with inadequate artillery and almost no fortifications. The Red Army advanced at 20 miles per day. Grodno fell on July 19th, Brest-Litovsk on August 1st. By August 2nd, Soviet forces were just 60 miles from Warsaw. Western diplomats began evacuating. Foreign governments prepared to recognize the inevitable Soviet victory. Tukhachevsky issued his order of the day. To the west, over the corpse of White Poland, lies the road to worldwide conflagration. March on Vilno, Minsk, Warsaw, onward to Berlin over the corpse of Poland. In Moscow, Lenin was already looking beyond Warsaw. At a closed party meeting, he would later admit, "We confronted the question of whether to Sovietize Poland, By destroying the Polish army, we are destroying the Versailles Treaty on which the entire system of international relations is based. This wasn't just a war for territory. It was a war for the future of Europe, and Poland was losing. Britain's David Lloyd George pressured Poland to surrender on Soviet terms. France sent advisors, but little material help. And even that was blocked by socialist trade unions who refused to let weapons reach reactionary Poland. Workers in Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Germany sabotaged shipments. The world had written Poland off. In Warsaw, Polish politicians tried desperately to negotiate peace on any terms. The Bolsheviks refused. They wanted total victory. By August 10th, Soviet cavalry had crossed the Vistula River west of Warsaw. The noose was tightening. The city would fall within days. Or so everyone thought. Here's what the Soviets didn't know. They were walking into a trap. While Tukhachevsky was supremely confident, Józef Piłsudski was planning the most audacious military maneuver of the war. A counteroffensive so risky it bordered on madness. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. While the main Soviet forces attacked Warsaw from the east, Piłsudski would secretly concentrate 5 divisions, his reserve army, along the Weeps River to the south. Then, while Warsaw held, this strike force would punch north through the gap between Soviet fronts, cut behind Tukhachevsky's armies, and destroy them from the rear. It required perfect timing, perfect coordination, and perfect secrecy. If it failed, Poland would cease to exist. But Piłsudski had one critical advantage that the Soviets didn't know about. Polish cryptographers had broken the Red Army's radio codes. Every order Tukhachevsky sent, Polish intelligence was reading in real time. They knew exactly where the Soviets were weak. On August 13th, the initial Soviet assault on Warsaw was repulsed. The Polish First Army held. But this was just the beginning. On August 14th, General Władysław Sikorski's Fifth Army counterattacked from the Modlin Fortress north of Warsaw, crossing the WKRA River. His men were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. But they fought with the desperation of men defending their homes. Within 24 hours, they'd halted the Soviet advance. Within 2 days, they'd turned it into a rout. The Soviets were advancing at 30 kilometers per day, in the wrong direction. Then, on August 16th, Piłsudski launched the main blow. His reserve army surged north from the Dniepers, finding exactly what intelligence had promised: a massive gap between Soviet fronts, defended only by the weak Moser Group. Polish forces advanced 50 miles in 2 days. By August 18th, they'd reached the rear of Tukhachevsky's entire northern force. The majority of his armies were encircled. Tukhachevsky was 300 miles away in Minsk. When he finally realized what was happening, he ordered a general retreat. But it was too late. His orders either arrived too late or didn't arrive at all. The Soviet armies fell into chaos. Entire divisions panicked and disintegrated. The vaunted Red Army, victorious over the Whites, confident in their revolutionary destiny, broke and ran. Let me tell you about the human dimension of this victory. Warsaw's citizens had dug trenches around their city. Priests, students, workers, people who had never held a rifle, stood ready to defend their newly reborn nation. When the tide turned, when the news came that Sikorsky was pushing the Soviets back, that Piłsudski had cut behind enemy lines, the entire city erupted. Church bells rang. People wept in the streets, not because the danger was over, far from it, but because for the first time in weeks, there was hope. In the south, another drama was unfolding. Semyon Budyonny's feared 1st Cavalry Army, the Red Cossacks, was supposed to race north and reinforce Tukhachevsky. But Stalin, chief political commissar of the Southwest Front, had other plans. Obsessed with capturing Lwów for personal glory, he ignored orders. Budyonny's cavalry stayed south. This personal rivalry between Soviet commanders, the ego games of Stalin, and the grudge between Tukhachevsky and Yegorov cost them the war. Instead of reinforcing Warsaw, Budyonny's cavalry was intercepted near Zamość on August 29th. What followed was the Battle of Komarów, the greatest cavalry battle since 1813 and one of the last in history. Sabers flashing, thousands of horses thundering across the Ukrainian plain, the Poles won. Budyonny retreated in disarray. By early September, Polish forces were advancing on all fronts, recapturing virtually all the territory lost during the summer. Tukhachevsky tried to establish a new defensive line along the Niemen River in September, but the Poles outflanked him again in the Battle of the Niemen. The Red Army, once seemingly invincible, was broken. On October 12, 1920, an armistice was signed at Riga. The war was over. So what did this battle mean? In the immediate aftermath, Poland captured 66,000 prisoners of war, 231 artillery pieces, and over 1,000 machine guns. Tens of thousands more Soviet soldiers fled into internment in East Prussia and Lithuania. But the real significance runs deeper. Historian A.J.P. Taylor wrote that the Polish-Soviet War largely determined the course of European history for the next 20 years or more. Sociologist Alexander Gela argued that the Polish victory had gained 20 years of independence not only for Poland, but for an entire central part of Europe. Think about that. If Warsaw had fallen in August 1920, the Red Army would have reached Germany, a country in revolutionary chaos, ripe for communist takeover. France would have faced a hostile communist bloc on its eastern border. Thus, the entire map of Europe would have been redrawn. The miracle at the Vistula didn't just save Poland. It delayed the Iron Curtain for 2 decades. Lenin himself admitted that Soviet leaders unavowedly and almost unconsciously abandoned the cause of international revolution after this defeat. It would be 20 years before Soviet armies again crossed into Europe, this time under Stalin, in the wake of the Nazi-Soviet pact. And yet, this pivotal battle remains largely forgotten. Why? During the Cold War, communist governments in Poland and throughout the Soviet bloc minimized or omitted the Polish-Soviet War from history books. It didn't fit the narrative. A Polish victory over Soviet Russia? Inconvenient. Even in the West, the battle was overshadowed by the aftermath of World War I and the rise of fascism in the 1930s. But here's what we can't forget. In August 1920, when the fate of Europe hung by a thread, it was ordinary Polish soldiers, exhausted, outnumbered, fighting with mismatched weapons, who held the line. It was the brilliance of Piłsudski's strategy and the courage of commanders like Sikorsky that turned the tide. And it was the breaking of Soviet codes by Polish cryptographers, the unsung heroes who fought their war in silence, that made the miracle possible. The Battle of Warsaw reminds us that history's turning points often happen in places we least expect, fought by people the world has already written off. If you found this story as compelling as I did, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because here at Forgotten Frontlines, we uncover the battles that changed history but never made the headlines. Drop a comment below. Had you heard of the miracle at the Vistula before this video? What other forgotten battles should we cover? And remember, history isn't just dates and statistics. It's the story of human beings facing impossible odds, and sometimes, against all logic, prevailing. Until next time, this is Marcus. Keep exploring the Forgotten Frontlines.